I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, Velocities in Music, the best kept secret in music reviews. A couple of years ago, there was a brand new indie duo that came onto the scene with tremendous force. I remember there being a lot of buzz around Colts, which are a New York City male-female duo. And yeah.
Are there a lot of those, I wonder?
There's a few.
It seems like these male-female duos are just popping up every day.
It's kind of in vogue right now. It definitely was in vogue back in 2010, 2011, 2012.
A lot of them are pretty good.
Yes,
I gotta give them that.
Well, and what's interesting is as all these duos have debuted, come out, gotten success, and then put out their debut albums, and then gone on these huge tours, garnering all these new fans, and then all of a sudden they start putting out their second and even third albums, like something like Sleigh Bells, or for instance. It's interesting to see how they change their sound with each successive album. Colts, for instance, came out with their debut self-titled album in 2011, which I remember we liked pretty well.
Yeah, we did.
It had a lot of, upbeat, kind of indie pop vibe that really referenced a lot of the 1960s pop sound. It incorporated a lot of just indie rock, bright guitar. The vocalist, I think her name is Madeline Fallon. She has this wispy, almost like twee vocal presence to it, and there's a lot of interplay between the male and female vocalists. Now with Static, we get a bit more of a change in sound, I would say. They're definitely maturing as songwriters. The arrangements are a bit more complex. You're getting, your basic bass line, you have some, nice drums, guitar lines that are in there, but the sound is very dense. A lot of times you might even have light keys, or even some sort of synthesizers in there, but the whole sound is just a lot more dense than what I remember hearing on their debut album. Tom, what was your take on Colt's sound?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. As setting it up, just the basic sound, they are trying to jam more into the mix and into the songwriting for sure. I wouldn't say that this is a complete departure from where their debut was, but it just expands on it a little bit.
It's a maturation.
Exactly. It's going in the same direction, but it's just adding more elements and trying to make it a little more interesting. And as you said, they're doing that with these kind of mixed instrumentals, and also with just the general songwriting being a little bit more expansive. Now, at the same time, they still kept the entire album to a pretty short, 11 tracks, mostly around 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah, so they didn't rock the boat too much.
No, they didn't. No. But the thing is, it just feels a little bit less poppy and bright. It does feel a little bit more down and a little bit more obscured. Part of that's the production. Part of that is the songwriting. I found the thing that I really liked about their debut was just mostly the vocal melodies.
It was fun.
Yeah,
it was fun. It had great hooks. It was just interesting to listen to.
And as you said, there was a great interplay between the male and female vocalists. I don't feel like that's quite as present here.
No.
I think that in making the instrumentals a little bit more of the focus, they took a step back vocally.
Yeah.
And because of that, you don't really get that kind of conversation between the two vocalists, which I think is a little bit of a shame, but they're trying to compensate in other areas.
And would you say that this album is a bit more moody, a bit more serious? It's like they're trying to take themselves a little bit... The subject matter just feels more serious.
Yeah, it does.
So I read that this is actually because the couple broke up. It's so sad they broke up, as couples do sometimes. Hence the difference in album covers. Two very similar album covers between their debut album and Static, and the debut album they were facing each other and rocking out, and now they're rocking out facing away from each other. Ooh,
you're starting a Paul is Dead conspiracy
here.
It's
Paul is Dead. but the in not having that interplay between the vocalists actually makes sense. This album feels a little bit heavier. You can tell that there's a lot of emotion driving these tracks. Now, some of the hooks, some of the climaxes in the chorus have a lot of energy that didn't exist, but it's a different form of energy that you hear here. It's especially when they're really like the pounding drums that you hear. Like I kind of feel like that adds a lot of tension to the music, and it's that tension that reigns in this different mood. It makes this album feel like a different album than their self-titled debut. So if you were into their self-titled debut and loved that poppy sound, which we really liked, this is a different experience. Now, I'm not saying that it's a worse experience, because there are 3 songs right in a row that I absolutely loved, and that's tracks 2 through 4. I Can Hardly Make You Mine, I think, is just a great track. I'm pretty sure that's a single. Track 3, Always Forever, and track 4, High Road. these are great songs. Some of the best indie pop / rock that I've heard in a long time. And honestly, I think it tops anything on their debut album. Now, as the album progresses, I do feel like it gets a little heavy at times because while they're approaching, well, for whatever reason, I don't really care about their relationship or what is all going on with that. I don't care. All I care about is the music. So when I hear the seriousness in the second half of the album, I just don't have that sense of warmth. When you're trying to convey a mood or just a general aesthetic, you have to convince the listener as to why you're doing that.
Yeah.
And that's something that when you're happy and poppy and you really sell that like they did on their first album and then switch sounds, they really have to try to present that mood in a way that your listener understands why you're going there. If they were going to blame it on the breakup, they should have had a song right out in front that said, hey, we broke up. It's, something that indicated a very traumatic emotional event to the listener. Not super traumatic, but to the point that it would justify a big change in sound. That gives a lot of context to the listener and makes you a bit more involved. You didn't have that here, so you're left guessing and drawing your own conclusions, which maybe was the point. I just feel like it kind of just made me wonder, by the end of it, it didn't have the same emotional appeal. What I care about on this album is their songwriting. Their songwriting improved from album 1 to album 2, and I feel like at certain times on this album it's top notch, better than anything they've written. Now I would say that Colts' first album is actually more consistent than this album.
I would agree, and that's the big thing to me. I think you and I are a little bit apart on this because I just simply disagree with the idea that everything's better written here. I think that there are some highlights that are really good and showing a more progressive approach than what they showed on their debut, but for me it's about the consistency in the songwriting and where
I'll be the first to admit it's not super consistent.
And while I feel like I can listen to their debut and like every track and not be blown away, but thoroughly enjoy each one on a consistent level, this one's a little more hit or miss. It's got 2 tracks of the 11 that are under 2 minutes and feel, it's kind of like an intro and another in-between track. And so of the 9 more full-length, fleshed-out songs, I just don't feel like there was enough content there to really grip me, but I still enjoyed it. Enjoyed it. It's a good album, but I think it's just a tad bit of a step down from their debut.
Yep, and I definitely think that there are a couple of things they could have done to make me like this better is, first of all, I think the mixing is a little off. The guitars were way too quiet in the mix. Now, I really like the dense sound. That's what attracted me so much to the songwriting, specifically the songs that I love on this album. The songwriting is just super lush. There's tons of stuff to pick apart in all these different layers in the composition, and it's really cool. But I need to hear more guitar. That's just the nature of it. You can't highlight certain things, and I mean, I think that that's kind of what they were going for.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a double-edged sword. You have the super kind of washy reverb vocals, but yet your guitar is buried underneath this wave of sound. The other thing is I feel like the female vocalists, anyways, could have done a better job writing interesting vocal parts, specifically on the back half of the album. It made it a little bit less engaging. That's one thing you could have done to make this more engaging and bring your listener in and give them a reason for why you're doing what you're doing. Anyways, Tom, what you giving this one, buddy?
I'm going 75.
I'm going to go 79. I did end up liking it a little bit more than you. This will average out to be 77. Tom, what is the number 77 according to Velocities in Music?
Right in the middle of that bell curve.
It's that bell curve we keep talking about. We've reviewed 702 albums. And after a while, you just, realize that you have a statistical distribution, and 77 is the peak of that curve, which means that this is a solid album, because we typically preview most of these albums before we review them. Usually they're at least have some sort of good accolades to them. And 77 is just where we draw the line as being solid. If you like this album, if you like the debut album, you definitely want to try out Static to see if the shoe fits. Again, this is a different album entirely. We're really interested to see how you guys interpreted Static. Please leave us a comment at www.velocitiesofmusic.com or youtube.com/velocitiesofmusic. As always, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and let us know what albums you'd like to see us review on this channel. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, moving music critique forward.